Hello everyone, welcome back. This is our fourth video in today's lecture for week 5, day 1. And we're going to continue talking a little bit about safety and highlight the ways we can do error messages and help our users recover from those errors. And I'm going to first demonstrate a little bit of this by the magic that is Microsoft Word. So you may sort of take for granted a lot of the UI features that you get in word processing software like this because they've become a bit ubiquitous. Um, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to really emphasize a lot of the errors we've already talked about and how we can handle both uh, preventing and indicating those errors and then actually allowing users to recover from those errors. So in a word processor, one of the great modern inventions here is spell checking. And when I was a kid, back in those days, you'd have to run like a whole separate spell checker. And it was really, I mean, at the time, groundbreaking in that it would walk through all the words in the document that it indicated was misspelled and give you a chance to handle those things. But it was really tedious. And so from a learnability perspective, it was good. Like it was actually pretty simple to understand how to use this. But from an efficiency perspective, it was really cumbersome to try to do this sort of thing. So in fact, at the time, the advocacy was, well, just teach people how to spell better because these machines are so slow otherwise. But the magic now is that you can just type things out and you will get a little bit of an indication if the algorithm there thinks that you have misspelled something. And I want to highlight that when this happens, the type of error that this is a slip. Okay, this is the type of error where we execute improperly. I know how to spell the word spell. I just mistyped it. Okay, so this we would call a slip type of an error. And often with these slip type of errors, it depends on the severity of them, but a passive indication of slip type errors are usually pretty good. And so that's what you have with this little red squiggly line on here. Okay. The other types of errors that we could think about now are a lapse. And one of the ways that we could do that, typically a lapse is a memory type of an error, right? And we often think about it as maybe doing things out of order or skipping a step. Where a lapse that like you started to go along a little ways doing just fine and you kind of had this gap in what you're supposed to do. So this might be a memory error. A really common one that happens is a lapse memory error with honestly most programs is to exit the program before saving, right? So you can tell I haven't saved this yet. There's this little sort of cue that we're all used to here. And so if I go to save this, it is going to actively give me feedback about the potential error that I may be committing, because this is a really common lapse that happens in this type of software. So as you're designing a UI, you do want to think about that. What kind of slips and what kind of lapses do people have in interacting with my UI that I can help try to detect and mediate before they become a problem? So in a word processor and in all these Microsoft programs, quitting before you save is a really common lapse. So they built this in. And I want you to notice the difference in the way that they handle this. This one is now a very active, in-your-face error handling mechanism, in part because it could be very catastrophic if you mess this up. So the severity of the error and the impact that it'll have overall on your user's work is often what we use to determine whether or not we're going to use this sort of active way or passive way of highlighting these errors. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out here because they caught my lapse. Another error that we talked about, a human error, is just a simple mistake. And it's where often you're just learning new things sometimes is when these types of mistakes happen. So for example, I remember when I first started learning the shortcuts for copy and paste, I also learned the cut shortcut, right? Control X. So, but it's easy to kind of conflate those two. So I know that they're out there and I'm trying to use them properly. And so maybe I make a mistake where I mean to hit Control C because I just want to copy something, but I hit Control X, not on accident. I intentionally hit Control X because I think it's going to do something different. And then it disappears. And now I'm freaked out because I'm new to this sort of thing, right? I haven't handled this before. I made a mistake. With mistakes, unless there's a critical error here, often what we do is really just allow the user to handle these things. And the best approach is often just to make these things reversible. Okay, so across so many platforms now, it become really common to use Control Z. So we could do that, right? Or we could also design in here, a very common thing is to have some sort of a back looping type of an arrow to allow the user to undo. And in fact, here it actually gives you a little bit of a hint as to ways, one, that we could use a shortcut to do this, and also what it is that you're undoing. So this feedback really, really is helpful. And so I can undo those things. And so for mistakes like this, again, we can handle these in sort of these passive ways where users are just always able to reverse their last steps. And a key safety element is reversibility in your UI. You want to build that in all the way across the board so that if a user makes any type of error, that they can recover from that error just by going back to the last thing that was working. That's really important. One of the other errors we talked about was a mode type of an error. So we can set lots of different modes into Word here. One of the modes we can do is to choose to track changes. And one of the safety measures that we take in here is to make it clear that we're in this mode. Okay, so this is not a spring loaded, so it will stay this way indefinitely. And so because of that, we're going to highlight to the user. Now, one thing I do find in Word that can become a little problematic is that if you go away from this part of the ribbon, you no longer get this indicator. And I actually kind of wish that we'd have like some sort of space up here to also add in all the active modes that you have in. But if we go back over to this space here, you lose the visual indication of the mode that you're in, which is also the case for the typesetting that you use here. So if you change the color of your, which you also get a little feedback here. If you change the color of your type, right, you get an indicator that you're in this red typing mode, right? Same thing, you can have this mode, you can have this mode, you can have, well, those aren't modes. You can set all kinds of modes, but as soon as I go away from this part of the ribbon, I don't get those indicators anymore. So clearly Microsoft doesn't seem to be too concerned with this issue, but if I were doing some user studies and realized that this is a problem that people are encountering, is that they didn't realize that they were in these modes, I might think of another way to kind of add some information about the modes that had been selected that go along with no matter where you are in the ribbon. So I wanted to highlight all those things for you to kind of demonstrate what kind of errors people make in a UI and then the different ways that we can highlight those things. And so I want to talk a little bit more in depth about a couple of things that I brought up. The first one is this idea of a confirmation dialog, which we saw when I tried to close the program without saving it. That's what I got, a confirmation dialog. And these are typically these pop-up boxes, which are so tempting, and especially in programming for HTML, these sort of pop-up boxes are just really easy to program. It makes it so simple to do these things that we're tempted. But the idea here is that you really want to use these as a last resort. You have to be working on an error that's going to be a real critical problem, because this just crushes efficiency to put these things out there. And what happens is people also get what we call the habituation effect, that if you're popping up displays in confirmation dialogues all the time, people just start clicking OK. So it actually sort of undermines the safety that they're designed to do, because if I'm just used to clicking OK for everything on there, I'm going to miss the critical ones. So what I mentioned is reversibility is a much better solution than confirmation. And we try to design that into just about everything we do. We'll talk a little bit later about even the segmenting, how big of a chunk we put in our undo features is going to be part of this reversibility process. So long story short, try to avoid these confirmation dialog boxes and try to use reversibility or undo type of features instead. Okay. So to kind of indicate that for you, show the absurdity that can bring up to. So the error that I made in the word processor was a passive indicator, and it was really easy to undo this and recover from that error. But could you imagine if they like popped up a a big dialog box every time that I did that, and I had to click OK to move on from there? The functionality, the efficiency of that UI would just be just terrible. So hopefully that's really hitting home that pop-up boxes, avoid. Okay, so overall for error messages, what you really want to ask yourself is the error message visible? Because that is important, but it doesn't have to completely take over everything. And that's why I love the little red squiggly line, or, I mentioned in the last video, the credit card forms where you can put a little red box around the input box to indicate that there seems to be a mismatch between the input and the expected input. Visibility does matter. You want to make it clear to the user, but you don't want that to completely overtake them. And you also don't want that to be the thing that they have to address right now. Let them come back and address it in their own time. You also really want to make it clear what went wrong and why. And so if you recall, when we looked at the dialog box that happened when I tried to close the Word document without, it gave me a good bit of feedback about what was going on. Why did I see this? And it's asking me, do I want to save my changes to the file? And it gives me some good options here on what to do. And that helps me make a quality decision on how to recover from this potential error. And so I can make the choices. Save, well, do I want to save? Don't save, or cancel allows me to go back, okay? So clearly explaining what went wrong and why. You don't want to have a random string pop up as the error message, which happens all the time, particularly in online UIs. You can do better than that. And you know, you've talked about this in software design, software architecture, in how to make sure that your errors actually throw an error that makes sense and is meaningful so you can find it. In this, for the UI, you need to throw an error that actually is meaningful and makes sense to your user as well. And then you also want to make sure that the error that you give, the message you give, actually helps the user recover, helps them make a decision on what to do. And so a pop-up menu can actually be the place to, if they need the most help, pop-up dialog boxes are probably the answer. But again, you know, a simple thing like a right click on these errors can really help me make some decisions on what to do. So it may be that I misspelled, maybe that I actually wanted to spell it that way, I need to add it to dictionary, and there's some more options that you have in here too. So right click often gives me some options on how to handle some of these errors that I may have made in there. Okay. And let's see, so, oh, and the last thing that I want to mention on here, sorry, my slides are moving a little bit slow here, is that you do want to be a little bit careful the way you word these things, particularly in pop-up boxes, because you don't want to scare people into being kind of frozen in making a decision on how to handle their errors. So there's some loaded words, fatal, illegal, aborted, that had become part of the early software and computer architecture vernacular that really freak out your common everyday users. So if you say that there was a fatal error, that really is going to freak somebody out. You want to avoid those things. So be kind to your user. They have feelings while they're doing this thing. And again, if they're making all these fatal errors, they're going to feel stupid and not capable of doing this, and they're going to stop using your UI. So be kind. A really good approach that I love is to use humor and self-deprecation, which there's a great example from the Chrome browser when you try to go to a website that's not working, or if your internet's not connected, you get this little guy, and you can actually play a game. It's one of my wife's favorite little Easter eggs in the world, and she almost enjoys not having the internet connection work. So if you haven't tried it before, go to Chrome, turn off your internet, and just type anything in. And the error you're going to get is tell you no internet, right? And so look at this. It actually gives you some suggestions, which frankly are not super helpful. And even the sort of internal error message is actually pretty useful here, right? They tell you this is more meant for developers when you're actually trying to get help with this stuff, but it actually makes some sort of sense to the user as well. And then again, the humor part in here is that if you hit the space bar, this little guy will start running, and they'll put little tumbleweeds in front of you, and you hit the space bar to try to jump over them. And so it actually makes you have a little bit of fun while things aren't working. Okay, so that's what I wanted to get in about how to handle these errors, and the whole topic here, right? We're talking about safety. Safety is how are we going to help people not commit errors, and when they do, how do we let them know about those errors, and then how do we have them recover from those errors in ways that help keep intact the efficiency and the learnability of a system. And so that's really the sort of overarching goal. Safety is just as important as the other two elements in most cases, but it needs to be done in ways that promote the other two as well. So hopefully that gives you a good overview on this, and these are all some great ideas for you to include in your PS1. Next time on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about software architecture for UIs and how all the sort of pieces go together. And then that will lead into some of our lab work on understanding not only the software architecture, but then how do we use these complementary pieces of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make things happen. So thanks, everybody. I hope you had a great Monday with us, and I will see you next time. Bye.